Saints fans and Who-Dats from all over the world. It's time for the Bayou Blitz. With your host, Bob Rose.
Good evening, New Orleans Saints fans of the Bayou Blitz, and fans of the NFL everywhere. Happy Wednesday to everybody, and we thank you for inviting us into your homes. I am Bob Rose of the Bayou Blitz, and joining me, as always, is my partner in crime and my tag team partner, Mr. Kyle Mosley. How are you tonight, Kyle?
Doing well, Mr. Rose. How are you doing?
I'm good. We're wrapping up the halfway point of the preseason, which means that the games that count are just a couple of weeks away. As much as everybody was excited to get the preseason underway and get football started again, I think we've reached that point in the preseason where it's kind of monotonous now, and you just want to have your A team, your varsity team out there, have the games count, and hopefully have our Saints start bashing the heads of people in and putting some wins in the win column.
Yeah, definitely, man. You know, when you look at the training camps and you see it even on Hard Knocks, where these guys have been going against one another time and time again, and all you want to do is just keep hitting somebody. You start hitting one another. That's not a good idea. But what you want to do is be able to put on the field the team and show the progress from week to week to week. The 4 weeks means something. We have the 4 games of the preseason. So have we seen enough from game 1 to game 2 where we start to see how do you say it, like a shifting of the personnel, where we know some guys are going to make it, some guys are still on the bubble. We have our mainstays, of course, but will we see these Saints against the LA Chargers on Saturday night in a national televised game be able to perform well with the dress rehearsal, with Drew Brees being on the field, with Phillip Rivers being on the opposite side, especially knowing Drew came from that franchise and started his career. So it's going to be interesting, man. So we have a lot to anticipate on Saturday night.
Yeah, it really is. And just like you said, the third preseason game traditionally is a dress rehearsal, for lack of a better term, for most NFL teams. A lot of the starters and top-end players throughout the league have not seen much, or in some cases, some of them have not seen any action in the first 2 preseason games. And that doesn't mean that there's anything to be concerned about. That's normal practices for most NFL teams. But in week 3 of the preseason, it's not unusual for your starters and your top end units on both offense and defense to sometimes even play into the third quarter. So we expect to see Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, all of our favorite starters on the field for more reps than what we have seen in this preseason up to this point. And not only that, but as you know, Kyle, the Saints are already out in Los Angeles, and they started the first of 2 scheduled joint practices with the LA Chargers today, which is basically a live scrimmage, where your number one units will get a lot of activity as well. And to hear, and we've heard Coach Payton say it, and a lot of the Saints players, but most of the coaches throughout the league, they like these joint practices too, because it kind of gives them a little bit extra time of game type of action, so that way they don't necessarily have to throw their starters out in weeks 1 or week 2 very much, because they can kind of condense all that work in about a week and a half of time period before the major cut down over Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, definitely. But also you have an up-and-coming team in the Chargers, right, where Phillip Rivers in his own right is one of the more elite type quarterbacks in the National Football League. You have some complementary guys in the offense with Williams at wide receiver. You have Melvin Gordon. You have those guys, Bosa and Ingram, the two fantastic defensive ends that will put some pressure on Breeze and those guys up front. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a very entertaining game. San Diego, anytime we play these guys, it's pretty much a back-and-forth type of affair. I recall the game in London, the game where Drew Brees broke Johnny United's record. I mean, it's going to be one of those games where, it's preseason, but these guys really, really do want to win.
They really do. And like you said, for some reason, the games that the Saints have had in recent memory against the San Diego, now Los Angeles Chargers, they've always been almost like an NFC South game. A very physical, sometimes confrontational type of game. And we heard about a couple of verbal confrontations even at today's joint practice.
Wow.
Mostly centered around Michael Thomas, who was, from what I understand, just absolutely abusing the Chargers secondary, and they would actually make a couple of plays or near plays, and from what I heard, ran their mouth on him. So things got spirited at times today, even.
Well, and I think that's a healthy type of spirited type of situation. You don't want it to get physical where someone injures one another because they're angry and he made a play.
Right.
Well, if he made a play, stop him. If we made a play, let's keep making more of those plays. And I think that's the necessity for us to go into this game with the mindset of how we're going to progress. What are we going to do to be successful with the first squad, that first 2 quarters, to see if these guys with that offensive line, if they really are one of the best in the league. A lot of people believe they're the top offensive line in the league. Let's go ahead and prove it. You have that fantastic five, I like to call those guys, with Wolford, Pete, Unger, Armstead, and Ramczyk, and the young kid last year just was phenomenal, coming in and just stepped in for Zach Strief when he was injured. So, yeah, I mean, we have some very good talent on both sides of the football, but I just need to see how we progress, because there are some things out of that Cardinals game that really concern me, Bob.
Yeah, I saw a couple things myself. And our special guest tonight, of course, if you fans have read any of the advertisements and promos over the last couple of days, our special guest, Mr. John Hendrix, editor at Canal Street Chronicles, is going to be joining us a little later on. And, we're going to kind of pepper him with questions, too, and find out what some of his concerns are. But, yeah, Kyle, I did see some things that concerned me out of that Cardinals game. And it wasn't the fact that the Saints ultimately lost the game. Because as we've talked about many times on this show and many times in our articles, these games don't count. The coaches use the preseason and exhibition season to fine-tune their team and try to get specific looks at specific things rather than worrying about what the actual score or outcome of the game is. But, yeah, there's no question that there were a couple things that concerned me. First and foremost, at the top of my list anyway, was the performance of, again, the number 2 offensive line, the backup offensive lineman. I thought they played a little bit better against Arizona than they did against Jacksonville the week before, but I'm not really seeing anybody that stands head and shoulders above to grab that 6th or 7th offensive lineman spot and make you feel confident should any of our starting linemen go down, make you feel confident that they can step in and give you some solid game action, like Mr. Kelemete did last few years for the Saints. So that's the number 1 on my list of concerns. What's top on yours?
Laribas concerned me highly the game, and I don't want to just point one guy out, but I saw him getting turned by the Cardinals defensive tackle on several plays, especially one of the plays that resulted in Taysom Hill with one of his 4 turnovers. Man, it just seemed to me as though Laribas was not focused in the game, or he wasn't able to get the leverage that he was needed to do on the defensive tackle. And I'm saying this also, the second and third string defensive line guys, they played with a lot of effort, but there were a lot of times also they were getting turned as well, man. Look, I even saw Amniata as well as Rankins on a couple of plays. I mean, as a defensive tackle, you never want your shoulders to not be parallel to the line of scrimmage. Right. And once you start turning to the side, it's easy for those guys to continue to get you out of the plays and get you out of being able to keep your zone and your lane assignments and everything. So, man, that's what really concerned me with these guys, how the offense and defensive line played from time to time.
And you brought up an interesting point about the defensive line, too. First of all, David Onyemata, who, as we know, came into the league as a very raw project, but has been mentioned by many as a potential breakout candidate on the defensive side of the ball. But the knock on Onyemata has been his positioning. Whether it's his footwork, which has greatly improved, or his shoulder pad level, which is exactly what you just alluded to. There's a lot of times where he'll get caught at a pad level too high, or he'll get turned, excuse me, or his shoulder pads are east and west to the line of scrimmage instead of turning the way that they're supposed to be turned. And what happens then, especially as an interior lineman, you're now off balance against that offensive line. And as anybody who has played either side of the line of scrimmage in the game of football knows, as soon as you get the slightest bit off balance, game over. You've just lost that battle. So that has certainly been one knock on Onyemata. Excuse me, I'm sorry, folks. And I saw the same kind of thing actually out of Taylor Stallworth, who has been getting a lot of reps and for the most part has played very well against Jacksonville and played fairly well against Arizona as well. But Taylor tends to get out of position. And when he was at South Carolina, he is built like a brick wall. Yet he is in college, he was almost a liability against the run. And that's because of positioning and poor pad level. He's one heck of a pass rusher, which I think gives him a real shot at making this team. But to make the team and to take one of those spots away from a more established veteran that we know is probably a shoo-in to make it without a standout performance, Stallworth has got to show me that he can play against the run more consistently. He's done okay, but okay is not going to make this team on this Saints defensive line. So, yeah, I noticed the same thing out of Taylor Stallworth as you mentioned about Onyemata, is that Stallworth got caught with poor positioning or poor pad level a couple of times. And as a result, he got beaten. And it's those little things in the game of football, especially at the professional level. It's those little things that can make the difference between a stop for a loss or a big gain on first down, or maybe even a win or a loss, or in the case of a couple of these guys, their spot on the New Orleans Saints for the 2018 season.
Yeah. And Bob, don't get me wrong. I understand this preseason, right? And I do understand that Laribas is a backup, Stallworth is a backup. But what concerned me is, like you said, after years of preparation, knowing how to get your pad level to a certain set point, knowing how to be able to not have your body to be turned, and it was consistently being turned. Look, man, I watched the game film. Laribas 3 straight plays turned. I was like, wow. That was so telling to me, But also, think about this. if you look at the pocket, they were given to Taysom Hill and Savage. They did a better job with Savage than Hill, right?
Yeah.
But the one thing that was telling to me, they were not aggressive. They were allowing the defense to punch them first before they punched the defensive guy. You know, so
I kind of noticed the same thing. Yeah.
So they weren't being as aggressive. You know.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize for interrupting.
I was just saying they weren't being as aggressive. That's all.
No, and that's one of the things that makes the starting 5 offensive linemen so good, is that they are such an aggressive, cohesive team unit. And that second word that I use, cohesive, that's something that could be key too, because this time of year, and every NFL team does it. This time of year, they're trying different offensive line combinations. Now, you're not going to see that out of the starters, especially now that Andrews Pete is back and apparently healthy and good to go. Your starting 5 is going to be your starting 5. But when you're trying to make the team, or just in the coach's case, decide who's going to make the team, you're obviously going to give all these guys as many reps as what you can, and sometimes move them around in positions, different positions or different line combinations. So an offensive line often is only as good as how cohesive they are. Forget the individual talent. We know that that's important. But to be able to work together as one starting 5 unit, and that could be part of what the issue is. Now, I don't disagree at all with what you said about Laribas in particular, and the interior offensive line protection of Taysom Hill in each of the last 2 games. On a more general level, those guys need to show that they're going to at least be able to handle their one-on-one assignments, or effectively help a teammate in double teaming a potential disruptive force on a defensive line that could, frankly, wreck your offensive game plan. And at that point, you're not talking about a sack of Taysom Hill or Tom Savage. You're talking about a sack on a 39-year-old Hall of Fame quarterback whose health is going to more than likely make or break your season.
Definitely. Look, practice today, Ingram slaps the ball out of Breeze's hand, right? Everybody's saying, oh, well, that's gentleman's agreement. You shouldn't do that type of stuff. But that shows you also these guys are aggressive and they want to win. Bosa, Ingram, they're coming at Breeze. It doesn't matter who's on the field. So Armstead and Ramczyk, you're going to have to be playing your assignment very well. It's 2 of the best ends in the league going against 2 of the best tackles in the league. So it's going to be a competitive affair. I would be surprised if that first half, man, we probably would see around 6 to 7 scores out of what's going to happen on the field. I know Sean Payton needs to see at least 2 drives from Breeze where we're able to score. Unless that first one just goes so smoothly, I think he's going to have at least 2 drives. I want to see that team gel, or that set of the first teamers gel well enough to be able to put that ball into the end zone. If they're able to do it on the first drive, I think he'll be more than satisfied in exchanging some of those other players. But I just need to see at least 2 drives, and I think Sean Payton needs to see at least 2 solid drives from those guys.
Now, and you're right, Sean has said that before in past preseasons too. That when you're leading up to this game 3 of the preseason, he doesn't have necessarily a specific snap count on his Drew Breeses and his Mark Ingrams and some of the other top shelf guys. But he does have in mind what he wants to see, and offensively, it is usually 2 to 3 good sustained drives. Maybe they won't end in a score, but he knows what he's going to be looking for. And I agree with you, and I'll take it even a step further. On the offensive side of the ball, and I want to see Breeze and his rapport with a couple of his new receivers, specifically Cameron Meredith and Traquan Smith. Now, Smith has dazzled everybody all training camp and both of these first two preseason games. And he looks like another potential third-round steal, not that we want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But he looks like he could be both a game breaker and a consistent every down threat on every level of the field as a receiver. In Cameron Meredith, and I wrote a little bit about it earlier today, Cameron Meredith, we were just talking, I think it was last week, about the possibility that Meredith might not be ready for the start of the season, and projecting what the Saints might do at that receiver position if he wasn't ready. Well, then lo and behold, he steps out onto the field ready to go, and I think he played 22 or 23 snaps against Arizona. Mm-hmm. Now, he didn't record a reception, and actually one of Hill's interceptions deflected off of his hands on what was a catchable ball. Mm-hmm. Now, that happens to the best of receivers. I was more or less happy that he was just on the field, so I'm anxious to see Breeze build a rapport with Meredith as well, because all off season, we've been talking about this receiver position and how Smith and Meredith are going to be upgrades over what Willie Snead and what Brandon Coleman did for the team last year. Well, the receivers obviously have to have a rapport and a good relationship with their quarterback, and we know Breeze is one of the hardest workers in the game, and both receivers worked out with him a lot in the off season. But it is a little bit different, as you know, Kyle, to put that kind of thing into action once you're in a game type of condition. Now, that's exactly where we are.
Deuce McAllister said something pretty good about Smith. He said Smith in today's action against the Chargers, I should say, he said Smith did a very good job on his last 3 one-on-ones against the Chargers cornerbacks. The last 3 he did very good, getting separation, catching the ball, end zone, touchdown on one. If you guys go to Twitter, you can see that one. But he said the first 3, it seemed like he was just trying to fill the guys out. And Deuce said something that it resonated with me, because I was saying the same thing. Can these guys get physical? You see Michael Thomas getting physical, right? Mm-hmm. He's just going to play that way. And you see he's gaining more confidence every year. I would like to see Traquan become more physical as well, because what concerns me is Ted Ginn. The play of Ted Ginn this preseason concerns me, guys. And I people may say, well, Kyle, he's going to be fine. He did such a great job last year. Ted Ginn is known for doing this, having a good season. He did it in Carolina. He did it with the Cardinals. Great season, fall off season. Great season, fall off season. Great season. He was never consistent. And his effort in the games, I'm not saying in practice, because I saw one practice, he did pretty good, but the effort I saw, especially when the guy intercepted the ball, his effort just going after him to not make sure he did not intercept the ball was kind of like blase. Am I wrong? I mean, that's what I noticed. A couple of the times I know he was targeted, around 4 or 5 times in the game. He had, 2 receptions that I recall, but it just didn't seem like he had that same effort or passion. Maybe he just had an off game. Hopefully that's it. But if Ted Ginn doesn't watch out, that number 2 spot could easily become Traquan Smith's spot. That's all I'm saying. Okay? That's all I'm saying, Bob, because we need to look at it for what it is. Marcus Colston, when he came in, nobody thought this 7th-round pick was going to be the number 2 wide receiver for the Saints in 2006, opposite of Joe Horn, did they? It can happen.
Yep.
That's all I'm saying. It can happen.
Look, I want to be careful what I say about Ted Ginn Jr. because I made some remarks last off season, and
you called him brick hands. You called him brick hands.
What's that?
You called him brick hands.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't have to be careful if you don't mind. If you don't mind repeating what I said. But yeah.
Bob. Look, man, I'm not gonna leave you out there. I said the same thing. So I'm not. So I was wrong. He had a great season. So yeah. It's okay. We could be wrong. Okay, buddy.
Yeah, and you and I were both admitted it on more than one occasion. As the course of the year went on, Ginn really did have a very good season for the New Orleans Saints, much better than certainly what I had anticipated. Having said that, yes, I am seeing the same sort of things. And again, now you were up close and personal at the practices, and I kind of want to pick John's brain about the receiving position too when he joins us a little bit later. But during the games, I am seeing the same sort of, again, that concerned me when New Orleans did first sign him to that contract last year. And I don't want to accuse him of being lazy because he does work out hard, in the off season. He never reports out of shape, or anything like that. But when you watch him run his pass patterns, in my opinion, only just, recently, but throughout his career,
yes.
He looks like he's running lazy pass patterns.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is he's not running sharp, crisp routes. And when you're not running crisp routes as a receiver, it can oftentimes put you out of position, or even worse, give the opposing defensive back an opportunity to make a play on the ball. And if they make a play on the ball, that's going to result in an interception and a turnover against your team. And that's the last thing that we want to see out of our New Orleans Saints is, for them to turn the ball over and to put an improved defense in a bad position.
Yeah.
And even Coach Payton, I think in each of the last 2 weeks, he has pointed out how he was disappointed with the receiving corps in general, pointing out incorrect pass patterns or lazy pass patterns, I think was one of the terms used, and he pointed to Ginn specifically in one of those instances. Now, when you're coaching, we know that Coach Payton doesn't have a problem publicly calling out his players. If he sees something he doesn't like. But that should put you on notice. When your coach publicly calls you out, that you are clearly doing something that could put, I don't think Ginn's roster spot is in any danger whatsoever. But I do agree with you. You have to wonder if someone like Smith or even Meredith, when he gets back up to full speed, Ginn could find himself falling from the number 2 receiver position all the way down to a number 4 position. And that's something that we really want to watch closely, especially this week, to see how Smith and Meredith perform in comparison to seeing if Ginn has improved his play during the games. So watch for that very closely on Saturday.
Look, no doubt the top 3 wide receivers will be Thomas, Ginn, as well as Smith. A lot of people think Meredith, I think he still has to get acclimated to the speed of the game right now. From what I noticed in his performance, he was only targeted that one time, but that one time was enough for me to say maybe the speed of the game right now is not where he is. And I really did appreciate the fact that he manned up and did say, yes, that was my fault. He could have easily just let Taysom Hill take the major fall, where Taysom could not. On that play was interesting because he had Meredith coming open on the inside route, but wide open was Mark Ingram. And I was thinking, Mark Ingram is not a small dude to see wide open in the middle of the field. So what was Taysom actually thinking about? Mark Ingram could have easily picked up that first down, move the chains, get closer, because that would put them within the red zone. that's why you can just see from a play like that where there's still some concern about Taysom Hill. Meredith, I think he's going to be fine. I just am concerned about, yes, the way some of the routes were being ran by Ted Ginn. And that's just my observation when I replayed the tape a couple of times. It just was a concern of mine. But one guy that really kind of under the radar caught my attention was Austin Carr. Because and I watched some of the Twitter video from earlier today as well. Austin Carr was getting some separation and catching everything that was coming to him. That's going to be an interesting dilemma for Peyton and those guys to see. Who do they keep? Are they going to keep Tommy Lee, Carr, or what? They just cut Huff, right? What's the other young man? We'll start with an H as well. So, I mean, there's some talent there, right? Who are we going to keep? Are they going to keep 5 or are they going to keep 6? If Tate is going to be that guy because he's the punt returner, kick returner, or what? Or is Tommy Lee out? Is he on the bubble? Those are the things that we will start to kind of hash out this week as well as the final game against the Rams.
Yeah, no question. I mean, we're literally in the home stretch as far as roster decisions go. And you're even starting to see it among the Saints writers community because more and more of us are starting to put out our 53-man roster projections. And yeah, you take that for whatever, however you want it. I wouldn't bet the kids' college fund on our projections or anything like that. But it's fun for us to do, and it allows us to try to to separate the cream from the crop, I guess, for lack of a better term. And a lot of the roster projections have the Saints keeping 6 receivers, like you were kind of just wondering out loud. I personally only have them keeping 5, at least going into the regular season, and then probably putting at least 2 on the practice squad where they could call up if necessary. My idea that they're going to keep 5 is based off of the fact that Sean Payton usually only does keep 5 going in. At least initially to start the regular season. In fact, 2 years ago, if you folks remember, he only kept 4. Now, especially in the first 4 or 5 games of the regular season, there's still a lot of roster moves being made, especially on the back end of NFL rosters. So whatever 53 that the team does decide to open up with, that's going to change drastically probably within the next 2 weeks. But as far as whether they keep 5 or 6, that's where your Austin Carrs or your Keith Kirkwoods or even Tommy Lee Lewis, that's where they all come into play. Personally, I don't think Tommy Lee is going to be on this team. I think he's had his shot, and he's had his shot to cement a roster spot by excelling as a punt and kick returner, and he just hasn't grabbed it. And that's where Brandon Tate factors in. Now Brandon Tate has had some nice moments as a kick returner in the first and some nice moments as a receiver too in practice, not so much in the games, but he's flashed some good hands and decent route running ability in practice. So I think at this point the 5th receiver spot is his to lose. Now, if they keep 6 receivers, again, that's where, are they going to keep an Austin Carr? Are they going to give a Keith Kirkwood a chance? Or are they going to stick with a more known commodity such as Tommy Lee Lewis? And that's one of the major questions that this coaching staff is going to have to answer in the next week and a half to 2 weeks.
Yeah. Tommy Lee is an enigma, and we see the flashes. We saw early on in training camp how he was very competitive with the football, and even that first game, you saw some little flashes here and there. Man, it's just going to be very critical this this game to see if he can be able to do something on special teams, man. And, Boston Scott looked really, really good, in my opinion, versus Tommy Lee. So that's another guy on special teams. Do we keep Boston Scott, or are we going to have just Kamara, Ingram? Looks like Williams is winning his way onto the same squad as well. And they just released Terrence West, right? So what are we going to do with these running backs, man? And that's going to be something of a critical play with Ingram being out for 4 weeks. So interesting, and I forgot Edmonds is still there, right? So if they let West go, that means they still have some confidence in Edmonds, in my opinion. Could I be wrong, Bob?
No, that's what that tells me too. And it's just like you and I were kind of speculating a couple of weeks ago, going into preseason. It was not long after they had signed, Terrence West, and then about a week or two later, they brought Shane Vereen in. And we were kind of thinking, between each other, that maybe Peyton was doing that as, sort of veteran insurance, because we already knew that there wasn't a lot of experience behind Ingram and Kamara. In fact, Edmonds was the only returning New Orleans Saints back with even a carry last year, not counting Zach Line, the fullback. Right. And Edmonds had just 9 regular season carries. So we sort of had wondered out loud that if these young guys, if 1 or 2 of them step up and prove that they can do the job, then it wouldn't be surprising at all if neither West or Vereen made the roster. As we saw, and as you mentioned, they already cut ties with Terrence West. We think, it appears anyway, like Jonathan Williams has really grabbed that number 3 running back spot, and has made it his to lose, which is vital considering that Ingram is going to be suspended for the first 4 games. So that means Williams is going to see whoever that number 3 back is going to be, is going to see at least a handful of touches in those first 4 weeks. So behind him, you basically have Vereen, Trey Edmonds, and Boston Scott left. Now, Boston Scott, you're right. He has flashed some good special teams ability. He is in the kick return mix every bit as much as Brandon Tate is. So that gives him an added dimension, therefore an added advantage towards earning a roster spot. So after that, Edmonds, they've been working out at both running back and giving him some reps at fullback. I personally can't see him knocking Zach Line off of the roster. I think they really like what Line can do as a fullback, and Peyton does like to use the fullback in his offensive system. But if Edmonds can give you some solid snaps from both the running back and the fullback position, that might be able to earn him a roster spot over someone like Shane Vereen, who is essentially just sort of a change of pace back or a third down specialist. Now, he's been solid throughout his career with both the New England Patriots and New York Giants in doing so. But Edmonds is more of a traditional running back. He's a hard runner between the tackles, something that Vereen is not. So, if you look at what the other Saints backs are going to give you, Boston Scott is kind of a more of a cut and slash this sort of runner. He's not the guy you're going to see carry the ball up the middle on a 4th and 1. Kamara has the ability to be an every down back, but at least at this point in his career, I don't think they're going to try to use him as one. So that leaves Jonathan Williams and another running back spot.
Yeah.
At that point, you gotta ask, okay, well, we just named off, what kind of dimensions the other backs that we know are going to be on the roster are going to give you. So do you pick a Trey Edmonds who is that 3rd and short and 4th and short kind of guy, or are you going to pick Shane Vereen, who might be like a sidecar in a shotgun formation or more of a third down specialist when you already have Kamara and Boston Scott on the team?
Yeah, and I think from what I saw, because remember Williams was doing the fullback spot in that first game a few plays as well, right? So it could just be, of course, Ingram and Kamara, Williams and Vereen may have an opportunity, because think about this. When it comes to some blocking and knowing those type of similar schemes, he's been a part of those type of programs before. So I think Vereen may be safer than what we think or really considering, I don't know, man. It's just going to be interesting. Boston Scott could be a developmental player. He's shown the flashes. I think if he is able to put together some pretty nice punt returns on this weekend as well as the following weekend, he may be able to win a spot on special teams. I don't know. But I think Brandon Tate is going to have to do something very awful for him to lose the spot. That's how I look at it, because I think he has pretty much solidified himself and has won the trust of the special teams coach to put him as the number one punt and kick returner.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, and I don't know that it's not, if that's the case, and everything that we see would indicate that too. If that's the case, you don't really need to carry two kick return specialists.
Right.
If you do have trust in one, because even if he were to get nicked up, you already know that Alvin Kamara can step in and perform those duties. You just don't want him to do it on a regular basis because of how important he is in the offensive game plan.
Right, exactly, because he's going to need to be spelled, man. And we have some battles those first 4 games of the season. And people, please do not think it's going to be a walkover against the Cleveland Browns. Please do not think this, because that's going to be one of those battled games that the Saints should win. And if they come out and doing everything they can do to win it, they will win it, because I think we're a more disciplined team versus those guys right now. But that's a lot of talent out there. Just keep that in mind. That's a young talent, young, hungry talent out there. You see it with those guys being led by Jarvis Landry as well. And Baker Mayfield, the guy is for real. I said it during the draft process. People didn't want to consider him, thought he was kind of similar to, what's that kid from A&M, Manziel.
Yeah.
Look, I saw enough of Baker Mayfield being here in Texas to know he was a gamer and a winner. And Tyrod is doing a great job. No, not Tyrod. Tyrod, that's how you pronounce his name. He was doing such a great job as well. But, eventually they got to put that kid on the field. They're going to, not got to, they're going to put him on the field, man. So there's some talent out there, man. And, of course, the Atlanta game is going to be one of those battles, of course, when we're playing in ATL. So, those first 4 games are so pivotal. We've got to come out at least 3-1 for us to be able to win the South. That's my opinion. To start 3-1 at least. We can come out really 4-0, but we've got to be at least 3-1.
You can't disagree with that. And not only for the NFC South, but just to be able to hold an advantage coming out of the first quarter of the season, because it's going to be a race all year long to try to grab one of those top 2 NFC playoff spots. Because as we've talked about on the show many times, the NFC looks like an absolute meat grinder this year in terms of Super Bowl contenders, with as many as perhaps 6 teams that realistically are Super Bowl favorites going in. So you want every single advantage that you can get over them, with chief among them being trying to earn home field advantage. I almost said home court. This isn't basketball. But yeah, so you want to target your division first, and then aim for a highest seed as possible going into the playoffs. Does that guarantee you a Super Bowl berth? No, of course it doesn't. But you would much rather play a contender under your home turf than having to go on the road where you're already at a disadvantage. Playing in front of somebody else's fans, sleeping in a hotel instead of at home, et cetera, et cetera. And so these first 4 games, you have Tampa Bay, a division rival, always key when it comes to the standings, and always a dogfight whether you're at their place or they're at yours. Then you have the Browns, who look, like you said, Kyle, to be an improved team, and
just
they certainly look so on paper. You can't deny that.
Yeah, they're still a little bit undisciplined. That's going to be their downfall. You can see where they're going to make some critical mistakes at critical junctures of the game. So they may not be all the way there yet, guys. So that's all I'm saying. Go ahead.
Right. But then after that, you have the New York Giants, and you have to travel north to play New York. Again, it's never easy to play on the road. But New York does have a pretty distinct home field advantage of their own. And a pretty talented roster. I know they fell on some hard times last year, but people forget that the year before they were a playoff team.
Yeah.
And Giant-Saints games are always a toss-up. I can't ever remember, at least in all the years I've been watching New Orleans Saints football, I can never remember a game against the Giants where one team blew out the other team. Even back in the Bill Parcells, Lawrence Taylor days, those Saints, they always played them tough, whether it was on the road or at home. And then wrapping up the quarter point of the season, like you said, Atlanta. I don't think we need to say anything more about that and how big that game is and how tough it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm surprised the schedule makers put that in the first quarter of the season for the Saints and Atlanta. That's usually a big game, a big TV ratings type of game for them. I know later they're going to play in New Orleans around Thanksgiving, right? But
yes,
still, it's a ratings type of game. So Saints have, at least on our schedule, if we look right now, they're going to play at least 6 to 7 playoff games before the playoffs. Because if you talk about the Rams, the Eagles, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, of course, 2 with those guys, and of course the battles with Carolina. I mean, we've got some real challenging games this season, guys, and it's going to be very entertaining, but we've got to stay healthy and we've got to stay focused.
Yeah, no question. And again, just like you pointed out with the schedule, if you look at the 5 or 6 teams that most people consider to be the top Super Bowl contenders out of the NFC, you have the Rams. Saints play the Rams. You have the Vikings and defending Super Bowl champion Eagles. Saints play both of them. The Falcons are usually in the conversation. The Saints, of course, play them twice. And even if you're going to go out on a stretch a little bit, and some people still consider Carolina in that mix, well, of course, you play them twice too. And that's not counting the Steelers out of the AFC.
Right.
So they certainly have a tough schedule. They certainly cannot take any teams for granted, and they've learned that in the past. With this being such a young team and having success like they did last year, but not necessarily right out of the gate, because remember, they started the year pretty slowly last year. They lost their first 2 games. The defense was leaking like a broken dam, and even in that third and fourth game, they won them, but they hadn't really hit their stride yet. So the fact that the team came out of the gate a little bit slowly last year before they righted the ship, I think that they realized then that they cannot come out of the gate and open the season slowly this year, because that kind of puts them behind the 8 ball. And even after practice today, Marshawn Lattimore alluded to it. I think it was Marshawn Lattimore, but I think he alluded to exactly that because the Saints played the Chargers last year in a preseason game, and I believe had joint practices with them last year as well. And they talked about the difference between the way the team played last year against Los Angeles and this year. And Lattimore admitted that they were a little bit sluggish last year, and they realized they kind of got their tails handed to them and roughed up a little bit. Not so much in the preseason game, but certainly in the joint practices. And as a result, they all talked about amongst each other how much sharper that they needed to be right from the start this year. And I think you saw that in the intensity level of their practice. That bodes well to start the season.
Yeah, definitely does. And I have to apologize, fans. We play Atlanta the third game of the season, so that's going to be key on the, September 23rd. And then, like you say, then we go to the Giants, and that's going to be one of those nationally televised games. It's a late game, too. I was thinking about flying up to New York to see that game. So, I mean, it's going to be very interesting, man. And look, you still have the Cowboys to consider, too, right? We don't know if this team is going to be in the mix. You still have a AFC opponent like the Ravens. They're always in the mix. So we have some games, man. We have some really challenging games. It's going to be very competitive. And I think if we come through this season, 10-6, 11-5, 12-4, whatever, if we can stay right in that bubble range right there, going into the playoffs, and if we're able to get a bye, and the only way we can get a bye is at least having at least 11-5 or 12-4, right? If we're able to get a bye, I think we can do some real damage because you will have faced some very difficult opponents, and difficult opponents is just like working out. It makes you and prepares you for the real thing, right? So the real thing is going to come for this team, and if we can come through that schedule that we have very well, we're going to perform very well in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, no question about it. And, as far as record goes, you're exactly right. Saints fans consider this. Our team had an 11-5 record and won the division last year and still went into the playoffs as a number 4 seed.
Yeah.
So wrap your minds around that for a second. It might even take a 13-3 record to get the top seed. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me. But I think if you're shooting for around the 12-4 range, I think you're sitting pretty good because that means that mathematically that means that you probably have just beaten the majority of the other contenders that we have just listed. So that also means that you're going to hold a tiebreaker over them. And Sean Payton will be the first to tell you. Sean Payton and Drew Brees will be the first to tell you that the most important game on their schedule is the next game. Any one of us that are competitors, we know that, and it's for the exact reason that you mentioned, Kyle, because you cannot take any game for granted. These are all NFL teams, and if you're not at your best, you're going to come out of that. Come out of the week with an L. Which is going to severely hurt your playoff chances because there are only 16 games after all.
Yeah, definitely. And we must welcome Mr. John Hendrix from the Canal Street Chronicles to our show. What's going on, John?
Hey, guys. How you doing? I'm sorry I'm joining you guys so late.
Oh, no. Man, it's great to have you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, definitely great, John. Hey, how you doing? How's the family doing? Everything good?
Oh, yeah, everything's good, man. We got the little man back in school, and we're just kind of running through all that. The other one's growing, so it's interesting life having 2 boys. I'll just say that.
Hold on.
Well, I tell you what, I have, as you know, I have 2 daughters. That's older than my son, so I don't know what's better or worse, the daughters or the sons. So you guys and I will have to exchange ideas at a later point.
Yeah, John.
Little guy is in school. I'll say that either way.
Little guy is in school already, John.
Yeah, he's in pre-K. He's in pre-K 4-year.
Wow. Time passing too quick.
But this is actually his 3rd year. We put him in there, so he we put him at a Beckett program this year, but he had gone and started when he was 3, and then he did it last year, and then he's doing it again this year. And he turned 5 in December.
Wow, that's awesome, man. Great.
That is. Well, listen, I know what our fans really want to know is who the best and the prettiest of your writers at Canal Street Chronicles is. But I know that's an easy answer, and we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So we'll get into the tougher questions, I guess.
Sure, yeah. I think people want to know about Saint stuff. I don't know.
Probably. I know you spent a good bit of time at training camp. What has been your biggest surprise out of training camp, or even the first 2 preseason games, either by position group or individual players?
Well, I tell you, I think training camp, just the feel. I think we're seeing a different Sean Payton this year. Just something we hadn't seen in the past. Just seems like he's having some fun. He seems like he's just enjoying life again, if you will, and maybe last season was kind of what he needed to get a renewed focus, renewed sense of things. And, I think that's always a welcome sight. And, this is a guy who was on the chopping block last year in all conversations and stuff. And, Saint shouldn't have kept him. But I think that's one takeaway that you have. And second of all, I think the defense had kind of been the focal point for training camp. Because, there was just so many times the defense was just making plays. They're doing this, they're doing that. And, I think it was, you see the camaraderie defensively. I'm reminded of the practice at Ullman Stadium at Tulane where, they make the big impression. All of them come off the bench and strike the pose that we saw last year. Very familiar. But I think that's your biggest thing is the fact that this defense seems like they're getting stronger. I think this team is getting a lot stronger together. They're just really starting to build something, and they build off of last year, not like everybody else expected to say, oh, this team's going to crash and burn after they suffered such a heartbreaking loss.
That's and it's interesting you mentioned Coach Payton too, because I think a lot of us, even amongst ourselves, mentioned that we saw a change in him that resembled a lot of his early Saints career as far as, the intensity ratcheted up, but he was also having a lot of fun, not only with the players, but even with the media questions, and we know how he feels about the media. Now, how about, mention, biggest surprise or, biggest thing that's jumped out to you? Is there anything that you would consider a disappointment at this stage?
I guess some of the players that need to make the leap and need to do what they're doing as far as the roster bubble, and like the guys like Haloi Kakaha, PJ Williams, guys like that who just really aren't standing out or doing so much to really help their case for the final roster. And when it's all said and done, there's 2015 draft picks. They're in a contract year, and you would expect them to perform at such a high level, but I don't think you're really getting so much out of them there. Other than that, I think obviously the injuries that you see with like Marcus Davenport, I know a lot of fans are kind of a little bit upset because, you use a first round pick, you trade up, you do all this stuff. But look, he's practicing this week. That's the good news. Hopefully get some playing time at the Chargers. I think this team's getting a lot healthier. I think they're just being smart about it more than anything. But look, I feel that overall the makeup of this team is good. I think the depth is best as it's been in decades, maybe. Definitely the best, I'd say, in Sean Payton's tenure. And you're getting guys that, virtual unknowns that are people that are pushing others and just kind of staying hungry. So, but I would just say, those 2015 draft picks, Williams and Kikaha have really probably been the disappointments.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about, too. In addition to Williams and Kikaha, which I think all of us are in agreement that they are firmly on that roster bubble, what other veterans on this team to you that you think are in real danger of getting cut in about a week and a half when that big decision has to be made?
Well, I think there's a couple ones you might look at. I don't know that you can definitively say that, hey, Jermon Bushrod's definitely going to have a home on this team. I mean, I get the appeal. I get the good reuniting story about it. But, ultimately you're going to have to make a decision because Rick Leonard's kind of slowly started off here. Will Clapp's looking really good for all things considered. So they're going to have a decision to make there because I don't know if you can slide Leonard through the practice squad or, what have you and such. So I think that's one area to look at. I tell you that tight end, Michael Human, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because I always butcher it. But I think he's somebody to watch just because, you've got Josh Hill, Ben Watson, those are your top two, and I think Dan Arnold's kind of done some good things to distance himself, so it'll be interesting if they keep 3 or 4. But, look, Human's a really good blocking tight end. He can catch. I just think part of his setbacks and injuries and all that good stuff has just been what's ailed him. So that wouldn't be surprising if they do something with him there. And then defensively, I feel good about when I look at like the linebacking core. I think for sure you're looking at a starting setup of AJ Klein over at strong side or Sam. You got Demario Davis. It's going to be at weak side, and you're going to have Manti Te'o at middle or Mike. I just feel like that's going to be the best way they go. I think they're going to put in Alex Anzalone with Davis on nickel formations more, maybe Klein as well. I think Robertson's your backup backup in the middle. I think Stupar is going to be a backup at Sam, especially because of his special teams, and then Angelone's going to back up at Will. And then, look, I think defensively on the defensive end spot, I don't know if Al-Qadim Muhammad's done enough to warrant that he stays on the roster just because the way Trey Hendrickson has been playing. They're going to have Davenport back, and Mitchell Lahan has just been a guy who's come in and really just impressed. So I would say Muhammad's a guy that you can look at. And then in the secondary, look, I mean, cornerback, I talked about Williams. I think the play of Justin Hardy and Arthur Millette are going to make a guy like Williams really expendable, especially because of the way they work on special teams. So just a few ideas that they have, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do at fullback because Trey Edmonds has been used there. I don't know if they keep him there or what their plan is because I think Zach Line definitely belongs on this team as a fullback. He's one major reason why that run game was so good last year.
Yeah, no question about it. And actually, Kyle and I were just talking about Trey Edmonds and Zach Line. It certainly appears that Jonathan Williams has a firm grip on that number 3 running back spot. But how do you see the rest of the running backs playing out? Because you do have Trey Edmonds, as you said, has been working out both at fullback and at regular running back. But, of course, you have Boston Scott, and you still have the veteran Shane Vereen in the mix.
Yeah, so you already know my hot take. And so my whole thing is look, Kamara's obviously a starter. Jonathan Williams right now is your favorite to be the second guy. I don't know what the plan is necessarily with Trey Edmonds, but I know he has special teams value. But outside those guys, I just have a tough time believing. I think Vereen could possibly sneak in there. I wouldn't rule out another veteran or some of the guys that get cut. Because you go from 90 to 53, they don't have the roster cut down to 75 anymore. And the thing is, if they see a guy that they like, don't be surprised they bring somebody like that in. But I just don't see the Boston Scott appeal just because I know he can return kicks, but are you going to keep a roster spot for this guy just to return kicks and maybe get, 2-3 touches a game if he's lucky? I mean, I just don't see it because he's not a guy who's going to come in and play special teams for you, as far as making tackles and doing stuff. I mean, he's really going to either return kicks or maybe catch a ball out of the backfield. And we already know Alvin Kamara and Jonathan Williams probably going to handle that workload. So my hot take, my unpopular opinion that people just seem to argue with me about is that, I think Boston Scott might be a cut candidate, not because he isn't good, just because I think it's going to come down to a numbers game and the way they have to work with Ingram and stuff with those first 4 games. He'll be close around, but I just don't know if he's going to make the final 53.
And I got to admit, with all due respect, I was one of the ones that was kind of snickering at that hot take initially. But you do make some terrific points, and even Kyle had just pointed out, if you're going to concede that Brandon Tate is probably your number 1 return guy right now, are you really going to, and you just asked the question too, are you really going to reserve 2 roster spots the kick return specialist, when you know that if your number one kick returner goes down, you have Alvin Kamara that could step in and take that spot if he had to.
Yeah, and I mean, you got a whole bunch of people that can return punts, return kicks for this team. I mean, now are they effective? That's another question. But, you know, look, I think Brandon Tate did some good things. I guess my whole thing is if I'm going to get sold on Boston Scott, I want to see him go against some God's honest, real tough top competition to make me feel, because, you know, look, we got, and this is no dig on him or anything, but look, last year, perfect example. Darius Victor was a guy who came in here, looked really good in training camp, did some stuff in the preseason. Shoot, I think he even led the preseason in rushing. But he doesn't have a home anywhere. He doesn't have a job. So just because you do stuff in the preseason doesn't mean you're guaranteed anything. And that's why I guess I keep trying to caution people is in trying to believe all this type of stuff, because we've seen it over the years that, you know, that doesn't mean diddly poo, to quote Jim Mora. But look, it's just one of those things that's just a gut feeling. It's just something that I think about personally. And again, it's a roster's number because they rolled with 3 running backs last year. And a veteran guy, and I'll just say this, that comes to mind for me, that somebody to keep an eye on is Jamal Charles. You know, they met with the Saints before. Peyton just said, point blank, he's like, maybe it's not in the cards right now, but that doesn't rule out a return later. And it just sticks with me because I could see Peyton saying, okay, well, I like Kamara, I like Williams in my backfield. We got we got Zach Line, we got Edmonds. Now let's throw a wild card because I like Vereen because he brings a lot of versatility too. But let's give Jamal Charles a look. I mean, I'm just saying that's something that could happen. We've seen Peyton do stuff like that plenty over the years.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of us thought that they were going to sign Jamal Charles when they brought him in for the tryout before they signed West, like you pointed out. And there's going to be other running backs released. The Chiefs just released Shenderick West today, I read. So certainly, Kyle and I were talking about, as you pointed out too, they no longer have that cut down from 90 to 75. They just have one major cut down. And I think that last year was the first year that they had started that, or at least in quite a while. So we still saw a lot of roster movement in the first 2 weeks of the regular season by a lot of different teams.
Yeah, and the thing is, and so this is where I guess some fans just don't know the process, but the thing is, Terry Fontenot, he's a director of pro scouting. He scouts the professional players, and the thing is, the Saints always have a revolving door of top people on their board, like a draft board, if you will, people that come available that they're interested in that stay on their radar. So, again, you're talking about, a cut down of 90 to 53, that's 47 players, that's 37 players, because my math sinks sometimes. 37, you multiply that by 32 teams, then you're looking at, a whole mess, almost 1,000 players potentially that are going to hit the market or something along that lines that are just going to come available. So, I mean, it's just one of those things where when you look at the grand scheme of things, look at how everything unfolds, they could have somebody in mind on another team that they're watching that might not make it. And just another thing to think about, too. John Harbaugh, a couple of years ago, had lobbied to Peyton to, look, we have no interest. We're not going to keep this Will Lutz guy because we have Justin Tucker. But, by the way, let's put in a few good words for him, and sure enough, he goes to New Orleans, right? So those are things that maybe under the table or things that happen that we just don't see or we don't think about that could absolutely happen when it's all said and done.
Hey, can I ask John a question? Hey, John.
Yeah.
Hey, tell me, what are your thoughts about the tight ends, especially Yelder had such early on promise through the mini camps and everything. It seems like he's kind of fizzled out. Dan Arnold, didn't see too much from him this last preseason game. What are your thoughts there? Could that be another position where if a proven veteran became available, that the Saints would be able to bring him in to the squad?
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible. So Deion Yelder reminds me of Corey Fuller last year, right? He has a good start. Everybody's buzzing about him. He's on 53-man roster projections, and then suddenly he just kind of fizzled out, and he's like, well, that was fun, but didn't make the roster, doesn't land with the team. Yelder's interesting. I think Arnold's got a lot more appeal to him personally. I was pleasantly surprised, because I don't know if stats tell everything, obviously, in preseason. I was looking more at, how he's picking up, what kind of routes he was running. And even though he wasn't targeted, I think he had 2 or 3 receptions or something crazy like that. But I like what I see out of him so far, but it wouldn't shock me, if Human's not in the mix and they say, I don't know, we like Arnold, but I don't know if we like him enough. I mean, think about last year with Adam Bighill. Everybody loved him. He looked good in the preseason. He's not on the roster with 53 cuts, but then they call him back on the first week of the season just in time for the game against the Vikings. So things like that are going to happen. It just wouldn't surprise me and put it past if somebody they like or they scouted, in college, or somebody that comes available that's been on the radar for a couple of years. But I still think Arnold's got the leg up in this competition.
Good.
You mentioned Big Hill, and that brings me to a question that I had about a couple of these undrafted free agents, undrafted rookies rather. Most specifically, Keith Kirkwood, Taylor Stallworth, and Lyndon Stevens. And John and Kyle, you both know my hot take on it. But you mentioned the Big Hill situation, how he played pretty well in the preseason, but he was still among the initial cuts, however being brought back. Can you see that happening with any of these undrafted free agents this year, or do you see any of them making the team initially?
Yeah, I think if I'm having to put it on the guys that you mentioned, I think Taylor Stallworth would probably be up in my top because you think about that interior line, right? It's basically Davison, Rankins, and then Onyemata. But they don't really have a fourth guy there that you can really think of. I mean, it depends if they kick Layton inside, but I think they can use him inside or outside. But I really think Stallworth has stepped up in a big way. I don't think Henry Mondo is somebody that you take a look at, not necessarily. And then DeVaro Lawrence could be another guy too. So I think between him and Stallworth, that would be people to keep an eye on. Lyndon Stevens, I think he's done some decent things, some good things. I don't know if it's done enough to crack the roster because it depends on how many corners this team is going to carry too. And guys like that, his way onto the team is special teams. The same thing with Kirkwood. If he were to make it, if something were to happen, he's got to be excellent at special teams for this team to have him in the mix. But, look, I think priority practice squad guys, I think Barrett's another guy, obviously, people are looking at. As much as people probably want to believe he's going to make the roster, it's not going to happen. I mean, unless something crazy happens to the other two, and still, even then, he's shown some good things. He's done some good things. He's just not consistent. He just really needs to grow. So, but it wouldn't put me past if we had a couple of undrafted guys that make it this year. But at the same time, with the way they've drafted and the way this team is set up, you're not going to have as many of those guys because, you have a lot of the spots and everything filled up already.
Is Sheldon Rankins ready to become an all-star inside?
Yeah, I would say unequivocally yes. The thing is, and I go back to this comment because with Cam Jordan talking about last year, the thing is everybody gets wrapped up in stats. They look at pressures. They look at all these different things. But one of the things Cam Jordan said about Rankins last year, he's so quick to give credit to everybody else that's on the defensive line instead of himself. And he mentioned that Rankins is the real quarterback of that defense because he's the one that points out looks, he puts out formations, points out coverages, he points out all that. So he's a really smart player. And I think he's done some really good things for sure. I think when we look at the metrics and the standards, we're trying to say this guy needs to become the Nick Fairley, but I'll take a guy who can stuff the run and draw us at double teams and frees up other people like Cam Jordan to do his thing or Alex Okafor to do his thing. Rankins is a guy who's going to become a real monster in this league, and I have a good feeling we'll see a lot of that this season.
I mean, exactly what you said, and Kyle has been high on Rankins too. But like you guys have both pointed out, a lot of us can get wrapped up in statistics and even quarterback pressures, myself included. Deuce Wyndham of the Canal Street Chronicles has been on the Rankins bandwagon this whole time, and he's put out some wonderful film study on Rankins, even going back to last season, and how he does the little things along that line that allow the Cam Jordans the other successes that they've had. So you bring up some great points with him. Now, what about Marcus Davenport? I know we saw, he did see the field and did some rather impressive things from what I heard against the Chargers in the joint practices. Does he look like he's finally going to get on the field in a game on Saturday?
Yeah, I think all things are pointing to that. And look, here's what I'll tell you about Marcus Davenport. First of all, I never thought he was going to start. I never once believed, even when they drafted him, he was going to start on day one. And the reason why is because I believe their best path is they're going to have Alex Okafor opposite of Cam Jordan when they run in first and second down. They're going to bring Davenport in on sub packages, and I think it allows them also to be really creative where they could kick somebody like Jordan inside along with Rankins, throw Hendrix in and Davenport on the outside and bring rushes that way. But look, I think Davenport, everybody has to temper their expectations because if anybody remembers, Vic Beasley, his first season was pretty rough with the Falcons. And his second year, he had an incredible year, kind of fell off last year. But that's more of what I would say is that, you can't come in here and say Davenport's going to be a 10-sack guy. He's going to be this amazing dominant force or something along that line. It's kind of unfair to put those type of expectations on him. Do I think he's going to make an impact? Absolutely. Do I think he's going to show up on field? Absolutely. Do I think he has some nasty pass rush moves that are going to come in handy? You bet. But, I think fans have got to temper their expectations and let this guy come along because he is a rookie. Marshawn Lattimore didn't start wonderful. Neither did Alvin Kamara. Ryan Ramczyk didn't start off amazing, but they found their groove, they found their niche, and then they became a superstar.
And Cam Jordan didn't start off his first season amazing as well.
Great
so,
point.
I mean, you really got to look at
get it on his feet.
Yeah, let him get on his feet. Let him learn the system, right? I really am anticipating what he does the second half of the season. How he's going to be able to contribute in some of those critical games down the stretch.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point because the thing is, let's just be real. When you look at the first half of the Saints schedule, it seems kind of cupcake. And I'm not saying that they're going to go on a tear and go 8-0 or anything like that, but they do have a favorable schedule in the beginning, and their second half is, in all intents and purposes, it's brutal. Like that Eagles game, once it starts with that Eagles game, that's when it gets crazy for this team because, first of all, if that game doesn't get flexed at 3:25, I will be shocked because I think that's a prime game to be flexed.
Yeah.
Then you got Atlanta at home, Thanksgiving, that Thursday night, short week. Then you got to go to Dallas and play 7 days later on another Thursday. And you got Carolina twice, one in prime time, and you got Pittsburgh in the mix. So the thing is, I'm with you, Kyle. I want to see more of what this team's going to be like in the second half. Because if they come in here and limp around and just not come out and execute, then I have some real concerns for them in the postseason because I expect them to come out of the gate strong. But I think at the back half where, the NFC South is one and playoff position happens, that's really what we're going to see about this team and what they're made of.
Yeah, and we were just talking about that same thing, but it's critical that these guys hit the ground running fast and furious. And, John, I really believe these guys, this 2018 schedule is going to have at least several playoff games to prime them for the playoffs. So how well they're able to come through and perform well in these games is going to be critical for the season.
Yeah, and the thing is, everybody likes the Saints. I think the Saints are obviously a favorite of everybody's. Atlanta's favorite, But look, when I look across this team, I think because they play in the NFC South, the way their schedule is, I think it's only going to take 10 wins. It's only going to be 10 wins that wins the division, maybe 11. So I would say for anybody that's really thinking about it, I give the Saints team maybe 10 wins, 11 wins, because they do have some tough games. They got to play the Rams. They got to do all this stuff. Just all these different teams that are going to be playoff caliber. Eagles for sure. You got the Falcons. They were in the playoffs. Panthers, the division foe. I mean, all these guys that you're going to play that really could be something for this team. And look, I think when it's all said and done, we're gonna find out quickly how serious this team is and how close they really are to making a run.
I agree.
John, when do you see Drew Brees breaking Peyton Manning's all-time yardage record?
Well, I think it could be as early as the fourth week, but I think a lot of people are banking on that Redskins game on the Monday Night Football. And I mean, the thing is, barely 1,500 yards is what he needs. And the thing is, he's playing the Bucks. You got the Browns, you got the Giants, and you got the Falcons. And I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up at least one or two 400-yard games in between those. But I think Week 5 is probably what you're looking at. I think that's why they made the big draw to put it on ESPN, Monday Night Football, when he breaks the record and such. But, look, I would be shocked if he did it somehow in the first 4 games, unless something just crazy happens. But we've seen that before from Drew Brees. But, look, it's got to be Week 5.
That's kind of what my money's on, too. I think I actually, because I'm sort of a numbers freak myself, I think I broke it down. If he averages 299 yards a game, counting that Redskins game, and that's when he'd get it in that Week 5 matchup against Washington.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds about right to me. So, and, you know how petty Sean Payton can get sometimes with things, and that's when you had Drew breaking Dan Marino's record on Monday Night Football against the Falcons. The players pay attention to stuff like that. You can hear them on the sound effects, or if you ever watch some of the NFL Network replays, they show it, them talking on the sidelines like, hey, how many yards does he need? What does he need? They keep a tab on it.
Now, one more question I wanted to ask you, jumping back to the rookies. I don't think any of us are in disagreement that Tre'Quan Smith has been the most impressive rookie that's been out on the field so far. And in all fairness to Davenport, he hasn't been able to get out there because he's been nicked up. But what other rookie has really stood out at you from this draft class?
Will Clapp, I think, without question. I think Will Clapp has done some really good things for a guy who was drafted really late, day 3 type thing. I made the joke because they took somebody from La Tech before they took somebody from LSU. Is just kind of one of those things. But I think Clapp, he has a unique opportunity because I don't think you have anybody definitive that has come in here and said, okay, this is the Senio Kelemete replacement. Just haven't. You think it might be Leonard, but, he's kind of had some struggles. You think that Landon Turner was going to have more of an impact in Leap, but that didn't happen. John Fullington ends up, having injury or having issues. He didn't do it after starting his first team. So, my money is starting to look more on Will Clapp, and I think he's really getting to be underrated. I think they're using him in the right way. Cameron Tom is a guy I want to see a little bit more out of too, but they're using him more primarily at center. So, look, I think at the end of it all, we know that Tre'Quan Smith has been pretty incredible. But Will Clapp definitely deserves an honorable mention.
John, do you think Unger is 100% healthy right now?
I think people will put on a good face. I haven't seen anything particular that suggests that, Unger isn't 100%, and this is a guy who played in every single snap last year for offense, and so did Ryan Ramczyk. So, look, I think if it's something he's dealing with, it's probably minor. I know he's been around and stuff for different things, but I don't really have too many concerns there for him.
Yeah, and the only reason why I asked the question to you is that I saw him being pushed around a little bit on last weekend, more than ever before, and that kind of concerned me. And he's a professional, so of course he's going to be on the field, and he's one of the leaders, if not the leader, on the offensive line. But I just was kind of concerned from what I saw on a few of the plays with the first team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, I think when you look at how the run game was against the Cardinals, that was really refreshing. I mean, it didn't matter who they put in there. The running game was just really successful. So that's always a welcome thing because you see Teron Armstead out there pulling, left tackle, or Andres Pete doing his thing, or Ryan Ramczyk and Larry Warford doing his thing. And the thing is, Unger, I know he's 31 and approaching 32 and such, and he's been around since 2009, and, I don't know. I won't want to say or speculate and say maybe he's just not giving his all because, it's preseason, but at the same time, I would be concerned, or I'd really be concerned if I see it more evident against the Chargers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably an area that people should just maybe start paying attention a little bit more, just to make sure there's nothing there.
Yeah, because I know they're giving Tom every chance to become that backup, because Clapp, I don't think he's ready for the center position, but it looks like they are giving Tom that opportunity to come in and make his mark as the backup for Unger.
Yeah, and the thing about you, everybody forget, whether you might forget or not, but Tom was signed to the active roster last year because the Redskins were really interested in taking him away from the Saints. So that's why Tom's on the roster. And look, for a guy undrafted Southern Miss guy, I think he's somebody that should be on this team, should make it, and should have a home. But he's got to learn a little bit more. And look, hopefully they have something really good with him.
Yeah, definitely.
You guys, all three of us see this on social media, and I know it causes a chuckle out of all of us. But I'm gonna ask the question. yeah, you probably know what's coming.
I already know where you're going.
But where do you see the Saints going as far directional as far as their backup quarterback? Let's assume it's not going to be Barrett. I think you're absolutely right. I think he has practice squad written all over him. But are they going to enter the season with Tom Savage or Taysom Hill as the backup, or are they going to? Is the backup quarterback saga even close to being finished yet?
No, and it's not finished. It's Tom Savage. It's been Tom Savage as the guy who's the backup, which I know fans aren't really thrilled about that. Everybody wanted to believe the Taysom Hill hype, and look, Hill had his chance to really distance himself and do stuff on against the Cardinals. And for lack of a better phrase or a pun, he fumbled it away, threw it away, type thing. And, I know there's been a lot of people talking about Teddy Bridgewater this. And the thing is, you're not going to trade collateral or draft picks or anything like that just to get somebody who's already under a contract for just a year. So everybody needs to pump the brakes on that and shut that down, because you can just pick him up in free agency next year. And, just in case, maybe he doesn't make the roster where he's at right now. So you just don't know how things will play out. But look, it's Savage, and God help us if Drew Brees ever goes down, because it's going to be a long time for Saints fans to have to deal with. But it's still Savage. He's a veteran. When it's all said and done. And look, when you look back at some of the quarterbacks, I mean, Luke McCown, he wasn't that impressive in camp, I guess you could say. He wasn't that impressive in preseason, but he did his thing when it mattered most. So, just think about that when you before you jump totally on Tom Savage and say, hey, he's terrible.
I'm sorry, John. I've seen him in Houston enough. Look, man, you made you sounded good, man, but I seen him firsthand. So, look, man, Savage is a placeholder, and Luke McCown was a placeholder. So, yeah. I understand where you're coming from, but the thing that concerned me, and I was making a case for Teddy last week, right, Bob? But what concerned me after doing some research, if we bring him in, that's like a $22 to $23 million cap hit to be able to bring that guy in. So that will be crazy. Problematic for the Saints to do so. So I understand where you guys are coming from. My last question is this to you, John. Based upon what we see in the coaching staff, do you think we're going to have some departures from this coaching staff next season? Someone like a Aaron Glenn to be given consideration for either head coaching job or defensive coordinator's position?
Well, I know for sure. So Dan Campbell's a guy that you want to keep on a close eye on. I think Dennis Allen's a guy that's going to look at. And I would think that Aaron Glenn is going to be up for some type of coordinator role. And look, these are all guys that have already been kind of tossed around or interviewed and all this other stuff. A guy like Joe Lombardi, he's been there before. I think he'll get some attention possibly. So look, I think that's one of those things when, you see a team's turn around like this, And then, if they can replicate the success, then you're going to want to go after some of those coaches that are making them do really well. So it wouldn't surprise me, somebody like Dan Campbell, real smart. He's real vocal. I think he can make the best out of players. Aaron Glenn is very underrated in what he's done in that secondary. So, look, it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see some of these guys move on after the season if they turn into really another successful season.
Okay, thanks.
You've given us some great stuff tonight, John, but I know it's also getting late, and I hate to pull you away from your family like this. Is there anything that we haven't mentioned or brought up about Saints camp or preseason that you think the fans should know about?
Offhand comes to mind. I would say, that we hadn't talked about. Natrell Jamerson is a guy to keep an eye on. I really think that he's probably a little underrated and such. I would really keep an eye on somebody like him, and I think he's a couple plays away or maybe just a game away from saying, hey, he's definitely on this roster. I didn't see as much out of Cameron Moore in the first game as I'd like. And, look, guys like the Taylor Stallworths, those are the ones you really want to pay attention to because, look, everybody's going to be able to see this game. It's nationally televised against the Chargers. And I know people want to see the Drew Brees. They want to see all these other guys. But when it comes down to it, when you're trying to assemble the best 53, we already know that probably the top 40 spots in this roster are already claimed by some people, or you can at least pin those in. Those last 10 to 13 guys are the ones that you want to see that are hustling out there. They get to get it. You see it in them that they are the guys that are going to be on this roster. So those are the ones you want to keep an eye on. Rooting for a guy like Mitchell Lahan. I think he's earned a spot on this team. We talked about kick returner, punt returners, and such. And look, I want to see more out of Cameron Meredith. That'd be another area to look at. Making sure he has good chemistry. And look, only other thing I'd say is maybe Ted Ginn Jr. Somebody is a wild card. I think we have him, obviously as a definitive staple on this team. But if Peyton's getting upset about him not doing the right routes, that's a little bit concerning to me. So something just to keep an eye on. And, I'm not saying that's going to make a guy lose his job, but, at the same time, if that's what you see consistently or if that's going to be a problem, then, at what point do you say, okay, that's okay,
John,
when you got a guy like Tre'Quan Smith?
John, Bob, I was telling Bob this earlier in the broadcast, that is Ginn's M.O. Great year, suspect year. Great year, suspect year, And I don't like the way he was. I didn't like the effort from what I've seen the past two games. I just didn't see the effort that he gave last season. And sometimes a guy can get comfortable and not put in the effort like they had before. But, man, you're kind of echoing some of the concerns that I have about Ginn as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I don't want to say he's the guy a surprise cut or anything like that, but at the same time, you guys know as well as I do, and if you followed Sean Payton for a couple of years or even just a decade or whatever the case may be, this is a guy who's going to put together the best 53, and if he can't get something, he can't grasp the concept, then you don't have much usefulness on this team. So it's just, look, that's something to keep an eye on. Not saying it's something that'll transpire, but, you're a professional athlete, a veteran who's been around this league for a long time. If you can't get basic formations right, I think that's either a problem with your head being in the game or you just something else going on. You just don't know.
Kudos.
Yeah, and I think we'd all agree that, at the very least, that the number 2 spot that Ginn held, number 2 receiving spot that Ginn held last year, it could certainly be in jeopardy. Like you said, John, I don't think any of us are going to step all the way out on that limb and say that Ginn is a potential roster cut candidate, but he could certainly be moved down the depth chart in the snap of a finger.
Yep, absolutely. And Tre'Quan Smith, look, I think a lot of people are like, third-round pick, wide receiver, maybe we'll see what happens, but now he's making the plays, he's doing what he's supposed to, and, It's you can get Cameron Meredith to try to be that guy, and you know something interesting that I took away from the Chargers game is they put Meredith in the slot and they put Ginn on the outside. So if you go back and watch some of the film or watch some of that stuff, I thought that was kind of interesting because I thought it would be the exact opposite where they'd put Meredith on the outside and put Ginn in the slot. So I'm interested to see how that kind of transpires, you know, for a couple of reasons.
And do you think,
no question.
Do you think Austin Carr has an opportunity? Because I know he's been catching everything that comes to him.
Well, I tell you what, he needed that game against the Cardinals. I mean, he caught all 3 balls that were thrown to him. Kind of says, hey, don't forget about me, I'm still here type thing. And, you know, I was watching the warm-ups. He was returning some punts or just at least fielding some punts. So I don't think he's a guy you can't necessarily sleep on, but it's somebody that, you know, clearly they like this guy enough to claim him off of waivers from New England last year. Mostly played on the bench, came alive a little bit, and was in the Vikings game and stuff. You know, I want to see more from him, obviously, but look, I think he's a good blocker. He does a lot of things that are really well. He just needs more of an opportunity to shine and put those out on tape.
Definitely. Awesome.
John, we really appreciate you taking some time out tonight. Can you tell people where to find you?
Of course, man. So you can find me CanalStreetChronicles.com. You can go to Twitter at John J. Hendrix. Hendrix, just like Jimmy, hit me up. I love talking to fans and interact. And, you know, we talk about whatever you want.
Well, John, it's been great having you, as always, my friend.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys. Y'all have a good night.
You too.
You too. Thank you. Well, John never fails to disappoint. I mean, he's always a wealth of information, and, you know, true to his word, folks. You know, he will chat with you about the New Orleans Saints or just football in general if you track him down on social media. As will Kyle and myself and a bunch of other great writers and analysts throughout social media. And you know, having said that, I go a lot of weeks without, and keep in mind, folks, I'm still pretty new at this, so I certainly don't want to slight anybody intentionally. But there are some terrific New Orleans Saints sites throughout social media, and in particular Facebook. So if you're a big New Orleans Saints fan, well, first and foremost, we got to, Kyle and I got to toot our own horn. So look for us on Saints News Network, and Canal Street Chronicles, as well as the Bayou Blitz Facebook page and group, that we just started up a couple of weeks ago. It's growing pretty rapidly, and I love the fan interaction on there.
Great.
So keep that up. I've been really pleased with it so far. I love giving people an extra voice. But beyond that, there's the New Orleans Saints Newswire, Big Easy Mafia, Crescent City Connection, Under the Dome, New Orleans Saints Nation, and, who could forget about Joel Smith's New Orleans Saints group, which I believe is the biggest group, New Orleans Saints group throughout Facebook. Do yourselves a favor, and join or send join requests to all of those groups, because there's a lot of good information. John Barry Hurst is through the Saints News Network. All the rest of the writers through Canal Street Chronicles, myself included, and the Saints News Network. We all post our articles throughout there, and we all love to chat with the fans throughout there. So if you're looking for us, that's the easiest way to find any of us, and that's also the easiest way to make your voice heard. But again, let's pat ourselves on the back. If you aren't a member of the Bayou Blitz group, once we disconnect with each other here, search us out. And throw us a join request. We'd love to hear your voice and get you involved.
Definitely. And you guys can always call into the show next week. It's 504-533-8444. So we'll have that posted as well. Man, it's been a great show. Great having John. Don't forget, you can always track us down on www.saintsnewsnetwork.com, and you can find Bob and his fantastic writing with John Hendrix and the rest of his crew over at Canal Street Chronicles at just that, www.canalstreetchronicles.com. But Other than that, guys, Saints fans, pay attention to what happens on Saturday night, the nationally televised game with the New Orleans Saints versus the Los Angeles Chargers. Ooh, that's difficult to say, but it is there, man. Bob, you and the family, you guys going to have a great weekend?
We're shooting for it. We're moving my oldest daughter back to college, back at IUP in Indiana University of Pennsylvania over the weekend. So I mean, we always have a couple good laughs when that's taking place. But you never like to send your kid away to college. It's always a little sad. But it'll be a hectic week. Matter of fact, probably the only time I'm not moving furniture from one place to another is, when I sit down with my notepad when that New Orleans Saints Los Angeles Chargers game comes on. So it's going to be a crazy weekend, but I think we're going to have some fun.
Okay, well, you enjoy yourself. And Saints fans, do not forget to support us on the Saints News Network. And go out to our website and hit us up and support these fantastic broadcasters as well as writers. This is Kyle T. Mosley of the Saints News Network with Mr. Bob Rose of the Canal Street Chronicles and the Bayou Blitz. You guys have a great weekend and be safe. Who dat?
Who dat?